Hey Night Owls, welcome back to Midnight Markers. Alright, Lindsey Clancy, what is really going on? We need to talk. Because if you've been following the Lindsey Clancy trial on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, basically anywhere people have internet access, you already know this case has become way more than what's happening inside that courtroom. We've got the trial. We've got the evidence. We've got the expert witnesses arguing about postpartum psychosis. We've got Patrick Clancy under a microscope. We've got TikTok investigators. We've got people creating timelines. We've got people who think Lindsey was absolutely psychotic. We've got people who think she was faking everything. We've got people who think Patrick is hiding something. We've got people defending Patrick like he's family. We've got people defending Lindsey like they've known her personally for years. We've got a TikTok social worker who tried to get involved in the trial. We've got a courtroom question about whether murder is a mortal sin. We've got people outside the courthouse wearing pink and rallying for Lindsey. And now we've apparently entered the witch talk era. Yes, you heard me correctly. So tonight we're getting into the facts, the theories, and the absolutely wild internet drama surrounding the Lindsey Clancy case. But I'm going to keep one thing very clear. If it's a fact, I'll call it a fact. If it's a testimony, I'll call it a testimony. If it's a theory from the internet, we're calling it a theory. Because some of these theories are juicy, but that doesn't mean they're true. Alright, let's go. The thing everyone agrees on first. Here's the weird part about this trial. Both sides essentially agree on the biggest physical fact. Lindsey killed her 3 children, Cora, Dawson, and Callan. The fight isn't really about who killed the children. The fight is about what was happening inside Lindsey's mind when she did it. The defense says she was suffering from severe postpartum psychiatric illness and psychosis and was not criminally responsible. The prosecution says she deliberately killed her children and should be held criminally responsible. And that is where the jury has to decide. But then the internet gets involved. And this is where things get messy. Because apparently a murder trial wasn't enough. The internet decided to conduct its own investigation. People started going through testimony, courtroom videos, old interviews, photos, social media posts, timelines, text messages, and basically anything else you could find. And suddenly everybody became a detective. And one of the biggest names pulled into all of this, Patrick Clancy. So the Patrick Clancy theory. This has gotten huge. Some people online are questioning Patrick's timeline. They're questioning his testimony, they're questioning his relationship with Lindsey, they're questioning the circumstances surrounding the children's deaths, and some people have gone way beyond simply asking questions. There are social media posts suggesting Patrick may have been involved in the children's deaths. Some have even compared the situation to other notorious family murder cases. But here's where I need to hit the brakes. There's no evidence presented in this trial establishing that Patrick killed the children. That's an internet theory, not a courtroom finding, not the prosecution's theory, not the defense's theory, an internet theory. And even Patrick himself has publicly pushed back against misinformation surrounding the case. But there is something people keep obsessing over, and that is the timeline. P.S. I'm one of those people. Then we have the shoe theory. Oh, this one has made the rounds. People online become fascinated with the claim that Patrick may have changed his shoes before leaving the house. And from there, the internet did what the internet does. One detail turned into, why would he change his shoes? Then, where did he actually go? Then, was he really where he said he was? Then, could he have made more time than we're being told? And suddenly, people were building an entire alternate theory. Some social media posts even dragged Patrick's later relationship into the speculation. Again, people are asking questions, but questions aren't proof. The shoe theory has been reported as an unverified online theory, not an established fact. And honestly, this is exactly why true crimes get so dangerous online. Because one tiny detail can become a 45-minute TikTok. And then there's the new wife. Patrick has remarried. His wife is Dr. Rachel Dennis, and let me tell you, the internet has a lot to say about that. People have looked at the timing, the relationship, the photos, the social media, where they live, when they supposedly met, and whether any of that should matter to this trial. Some people think it's extremely suspicious. Others say, wait a minute, he lost his 3 children, he's allowed to eventually move forward in his life. And honestly, that is a debate where the internet can argue until the end of time. But here's what matters legally. Patrick remarrying does not establish that he had anything to do with the children's deaths. It is perfectly reasonable to ask questions about someone's timeline. It's not reasonable to turn those questions into the facts without evidence. And then something strange happened. A TikTok creator became part of the actual courtroom story. Her name is Emily Thorndike. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a former McLean Hospital employee. She posted TikToks criticizing the hospital's care and arguing that some of the things being presented in court were being misunderstood. One of her videos reportedly got more than 600,000 likes. And then Lindsey's defense team wanted her to testify. Think about that for a second. A woman who became known online for discussing the case was potentially going to become a witness in the actual trial. The judge questioned her outside of the jury's presence, and ultimately the judge ruled she could not testify before the jury. One major issue was that she wasn't working at the McLean during Lindsey's specific hospitalization. The defense was allowed to use hospital staffing records instead, and that is one of those moments where you're watching the trial thinking, are we seriously doing this right now? Then we have the mortal sin moment. This one made social media explode. Susan Clancy, Patrick's mother and Lindsey's former mother-in-law, testified for the defense. The prosecution questioned her about her Catholic faith, and then the prosecutor asked whether she believed murder was a mortal sin. The defense objected. The judge stopped the questioning. The jury was instructed to disregard the question, and social media immediately went, what was that about? Some people thought the prosecution was trying to make a point about Susan's beliefs. Others thought it was completely inappropriate. A legal expert described it as a major mistake. But regardless of what everyone thinks about the question, the judge told the jury to disregard it, so it can't simply be treated as evidence against Lindsey. And now, witch talk. I genuinely couldn't make this episode up if I tried. People identifying themselves as witches on TikTok have reportedly been posting what they're calling justice spells connected to the Lindsey Clancy case. Some posts are supportive of Lindsey, some apparently direct negative energy towards Patrick, and suddenly the Lindsey Clancy case has its own little corner of witch talk. Now, does that have anything to do with the actual trial? No. Is it evidence? Absolutely not. But is it part of the online drama surrounding this case? Apparently, yes. And if you thought that was weird, wait until you hear what's happening outside the courthouse. The Pink Ladies. Supporters of Lindsey have actually started showing up outside the courthouse, and they're not exactly hiding their support. People have been wearing pink, carrying signs, praying, holding hands, making hearts, and publicly calling for people to support Lindsey and bring more attention to postpartum mental illness and the healthcare system. More than 100 people have reportedly gathered, with larger demonstrations also reported. And this is where I think the case becomes bigger than Lindsey herself, because some of these women aren't necessarily saying, I support killing children. They're saying, I believe women suffering from postpartum mental illness are not being taken seriously. Those are two very different statements, and that's where people online need to understand. But here's where the internet splits. There's basically two giant camps. Team Lindsey was psychotic. These people believe the defense's theory. They point to her mental health history, her hospitalizations, her medications, her insomnia, her paranoia, her intrusive thoughts, her family's testimony, her reported hallucinations, and the testimony from the defense experts. One of the biggest recent pieces of testimony came from the psychologist Paul Zeisel. He testified that Lindsey told him she heard a male voice telling her to kill her children and herself. He also testified that he did not believe she was faking her symptoms. And that testimony has become a huge talking point online. Then there's the team no way. On the other side are people who say absolutely not. They point to Lindsey's behavior, planning the searches, the timeline, her interactions with doctors, the testimony from medical professionals who said that they did not observe psychosis when they treated her. One psychiatrist testified that during Lindsey's 5-day stay at McLean Hospital, she did not display signs of psychosis that led to a postpartum psychosis diagnosis. So now the internet has basically created its own courtroom, one One side says she was sick, the other says she knew exactly what she was doing. And both sides can find testimony that appears to support their position. And then there's the really uncomfortable question. What if both sides are seeing something real? What if Lindsey genuinely had severe mental illness and also made deliberate choices? What if someone can be mentally ill and still plan something? What if someone can appear normal to doctors one day and experience psychosis later? What if medication played a role? What if postpartum psychosis played a role? What if multiple things contributed? Those are all complicated questions the jury has to wrestle with, because real human behavior doesn't always fit neatly into the TikTok video. The internet's biggest problem. Here's the biggest issue with some of the online discussion. People are starting with the conclusion and then looking for evidence to support it. If someone believes Patrick is guilty, suddenly every little thing he does becomes suspicious. If someone believes Lindsey is innocent because of psychosis, every piece of evidence suggesting planning becomes proof the prosecution is lying. And that's confirmation bias. You can find something online to support almost any theory if you look hard enough. And that's why we have a courtroom. And now the trial is getting really close to the end. The prosecution has rested, the defense is presenting its case, the defense has brought in psychiatric experts and family members, and now we're getting into the final stretch. The jury has heard weeks of testimony, they've heard heartbreaking evidence, they've heard completely different interpretations of Lindsey's mental state, and they are eventually going to have to answer one enormous question. Was Lindsey Clancy criminally responsible for killing her children? If the jury finds her guilty of first-degree murder, she could face life without parole. If she's found not criminally responsible because of mental illness, the outcome would be psychiatric commitment rather than a traditional prison sentence. So, what do you think? I'm not going to tell you Patrick is guilty. I'm not going to tell you Lindsey was definitely psychotic. I'm not going to tell you the prosecution is lying. I'm not going to tell you that the defense is telling the truth, because that's not my job. But I will tell you this. The internet has turned this case into one of the most fascinating and controversial trials we've seen in a long time. And some of the theories are absolutely wild. The Patrick theory, the shoe theory, the new wife speculation, the TikTok social worker, the mortal sin courtroom moment, the pink supporters, the witch talk justice spells, the argument over Lindsey was psychotic or manipulating everyone, and now we're watching the defense try to convince a jury that the woman who killed 3 children was so mentally ill that she should not be held legally responsible for what she did. That is the actual battle happening inside the courtroom. Everything else, that's the internet. And sometimes the internet gets very messy. So some final questions for you. So now I want to know what you think. Not who you think is guilty based on TikTok, not who has the best theory, and definitely not who you hate. I'm asking, what piece of evidence or testimony has changed your mind the most? Was it the mental health history, the medication, the social history, the search history? Drop it in the comments, because this case isn't over. This is Midnight Markers, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for joining me, Night Owls, and as always, stay curious.